But I made a deal with the doctor that when I could take one step from the bed to a chair, that he would let me out of ICU. And when I could walk around the nurse's station, he would let me leave the hospital and fly back to Indianapolis to go to the hospital there. So, because um, the feeling was coming back in my legs by the afternoon after the wreck. Slowly, but it was coming back. So, a day or two later, I took the step, and then he let me go into a regular room, and I kept working on taking a step here and there, and because where that had done damage to my leg, my muscle in my right leg, and from the frostbite and freezing, I couldn't hardly lift my right leg, my left foot, or my right foot. I couldn't lift it off the floor very well. And that took years to be able to do. But, so I worked really hard, and I was there for like 5 or 6 days, and I finally got to where I could walk around the nurse's station. And he decided, okay, the next day he would let me go and let me go back to Indiana. And the whole time, I was so injured and freezing and, concussions. I had some pretty good amnesia going on. My father called me and I didn't even know who he was. But, so the day I was going to go home, I was like, because I had rocks and dirt and stuff in my hair. I hadn't been able to shower or do anything. They did little sponge baths, but I needed my hair clean. So they put a chair down and I leaned across the sink, and I guess we forgot about all the bumps and stuff that was on my head, and she went to cleaning it, and it was awful. So she just rinsed it out, and I just left it go. But I was so injured that they wouldn't give me food. I had an IV. So this had been almost a week of no food, and so they brought me a liquid diet, and I don't like Jello, I don't like coffee, but I ate every bit of that and drank it and all this. But, and part of the deal too was that I had to walk out of the hospital. So, and an ambulance was going to take me to the airport in Omaha to catch the plane. So when the ambulance got there, the paramedic was standing outside, and a nurse helped me walk out, but he saw me and he was like, oh my God. So he helped me into the ambulance and put the seatbelt on me because I couldn't even do that. And on the way there, I told him, about the deal with the doctor and all this. He said, well, you're not going to do that. He said, you're going to stay right here. When we get to the airport, I'm going to get a wheelchair. You're not walking nowhere. So when we got to the airport, he went in and got the wheelchair, and the airport knew that I was coming, but I didn't know till I got there that I had to be the first one on the plane, and I had to be the last one off because I was so injured and everything. So he gets me in the wheelchair, gets me in there, and checks me in, and I find this stuff out. So he gets me to the plane, and they can take me down the walkway to the plane, but they can't take the wheelchair on the plane. So I had to walk from the doorway of the plane to my seat, which 2 flight attendants on either side of me helped me get there and sit down. And, at this point, I had never flown before, and I was scared, so I was up there just nervous as could be. And, all the rest of the passengers got on the plane, and we took off, and we had to stop in Chicago, and then I get on another plane and go on to Indianapolis. So, by the time we got to Chicago, I was a little less nervous about the plane, and by the time we got to Chicago, I was looking out the window and stuff as we landed, looking at everything. And I sit there after we landed, and I waited for, every single passenger had to be off the plane before I could get up. So they all get off, I get up, and the flight attendants help me to the door. There's a wheelchair there waiting for me, and I get into it, and we get going, and the guy tells me, he's like, okay, we're running a little bit late, so I'm going to go kind of fast. If I go over, if I hit a bump or something and it hurts you, just let me know and I'll slow down. But we need to get there. We got to go clear across the airport, and we're running late. So I'm like, okay. So I'm hanging on, and he's flying through this airport. And we get up to the gate, and I notice the people are standing there, and they're looking at their watches, and they're sighing, and they're doing all this. And then they see me heading towards the doorway, to the plane. And they kind of quit looking at their watches and stuff. But same thing, me first one on. So I get in my seat. And by this time, I'm cool with the flying and stuff. So when we leave Chicago, I'm looking out the window. And it was the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen in my life. And it only took like 20-30 minutes to get from Chicago to Indianapolis. So I'm looking at Indianapolis by the time we get there, and I remember seeing Toys R Us and all this stuff. And so we land, and they hadn't told my mom and my sister that I had to be the last one off the plane. So they're standing out there waiting on me to get off the plane, and I never show up. Well, after everybody gets off, I get in the wheelchair, and they head up there, and I remember them looking down like this so they could see me, and then when they saw me, because at this point I had been all over the place, and I couldn't sit up straight. I was leaning over in the wheelchair, and I was all bruised and scratched and bandaged, and so they were like, kind of shocked. But so they get me in the car, and I'm supposed to go straight to the emergency room at Wishart Hospital so they can check me in and all this. And I'm like, I just want to go home. I want to go home for one night. So, and I was starving too. I forgot to tell you, on the plane, I was really looking forward to those little bags of peanuts they used to give you back in the 80s. And I got a bag on each plane I was on. And that was a little bit of solid food in my stomach. But Mom took me through McDonald's and got me some stuff that I found out my stomach really couldn't take. I didn't eat much of it. But they brought a bunch of blankets, because I was still freezing. And we went the 60 miles to Muncie, where we lived. And I sit there and told them about what I knew about the wreck, and showed them my injuries. Where I had been dragged, my entire back was, just bruises, and I had bruises pretty much everywhere. And spent the night at home, and then the next morning, when I showed up at Wishart, they were not too happy with me. When they found out who I was, they were like, "Where have you been? You were supposed to be here last night." And so they go back and they examine me, and I didn't know it, but Wishart was a teaching hospital. So there's like 15 doctors ended up in this little bitty exam room, and they're all looking at my burn and blah blah blah, and they admit me and put me on the burn unit. And burns, if you didn't know it, are the worst injury you can get because it takes everything out of your body. You can get infections so quick. You know, if usually when people are burnt over a certain amount of their body, they don't survive because of all the complications that comes with burns. But my burn was only 5% of my body, which I am thankful for, and it was in an area that pretty much saved my life for what happened. But in the burn unit, it's very hot, it's very sterile. Um, you know, each person had their own room. You had to take, it was 2 or 3 showers a day. You had to have your dressings changed all them times, sometimes more than that. You had to eat a 4,000 calorie a day diet, which unfortunately I did, but I still lost weight while I was there. Um, you couldn't have live flowers. If people came to visit you, they had to put on a gown, mask, and gloves the whole time they were there. You had to be buzzed into the burn unit. They protected us really well because of infection and anything else that could possibly happen. And if we happened to leave the burn unit, because this diet you had to do at the time, I couldn't eat regular food. So I ate a lot of junk food. And I would go down to the vending machines to get bags of chips and whatever. And I would have to put on the gown and the mask and the gloves to leave the burn unit. And, but, so I was in the burn unit, and the wreck happened right after midnight, February 5th. And they set my surgery for February 14th, Valentine's Day. Well, by this time, my brother, who was in the Air Force at the time, had taken a medical leave, and he was there with me. He come from England to Indianapolis to be there with me. And they did my skin grafting that day, and they were going to take 2 strips of skin off my thigh to cover up the burn they were going to cut off. But when they cut the burn out, they discovered it was a lot worse than they thought, and they needed more skin, so they ended up taking 3 strips of skin and put it across my breast and ribs. Like I said, the burn went into my ribs, and they had to file off where it had burnt into them. So, my ribs aren't as thick as they used to be. And it does affect me now that I'm older and bigger than I used to be. But, so they did the surgery, and for 2 or 3 days after they did the surgery, I couldn't move my arm. I had to keep it completely like this, so I wouldn't pull that skin loose, and I'll never forget when they took the bandages off a few days later, because they left them on there to let it, and I saw the staples, because they used staples to put the skin on, and I thought, oh my God, I should have told you I'm allergic to metal. That's why I don't wear jewelry, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, oh my God. So from that moment on, I was on a Benadryl drip until they got the 80-something staples out of the skin when it healed enough that they could pull them out. So that was added fun. But I got used to dragging my leg around, because, like I said, it took It took years for me to be able to even lift my right foot off the ground. Um, and then with me having to hold my arm still for those days, uh, they had me doing this cycle thing that was trying to work on my leg. So after my surgery, I had to build my arm back up, because if you hold your arm perfectly still for a couple days, believe me, you lose muscle tone. It's amazing what just a couple of days will do to you. So I had to work this entire side of my body. So going down to the vending machines and stuff like that helped. But while I was in the hospital after my surgery, uh, if you know anything about my childhood and my years with my foster family, one day they brought me a card that had been mailed to me, and it was a get well card from my foster family, and I freaked out. I started crying. I was like, I gotta go, and they're like, what are you talking about? I said, I'm so injured. I said, I can't defend myself if they show up. And they were like, what are you talking about? So I told them a little bit about the abuse and the torture and the trying to kill me and everything else. And they were like, well, you don't have to worry about that, because you have to be buzzed in here. You know that. They won't get in. And they said, we'll get a security guard out there to make you feel better. And from that moment on, when I went to the if I went to the vending machines to get what I was going to eat, that security guard walked with me. I was never out of that burn unit by myself. There was always a security guard with me. So that added fun to that too. But I had been there about a month, and I got tired of, they wanted to keep me another month or two, and I talked them into letting me go home, under the agreement that I would go to the burn clinic 3 times a week. So they let me go home. It was sometime in March, beginning or mid-March, they let me go home. And I had to go to the clinic, and, I had to have bandages. That burn, it was bandaged for months. And the clinic would give me those bandages. So I would go 3 times a week home with these big boxes of bandages and tape and the Silvadine cream that I had to put on, and all this stuff that I needed. And eventually, when it healed, because burns take forever to heal too, it got down to once a week or whatever. And it was in July when they released me to go back to work. So 5 months later. But I had to continue to go to the clinic for at least once a month, up until they completely released me from the clinic, which they did that 2 years after the wreck. Because after everything healed, I had to get a lovely pressure garment to help with the scarring. So I had to wear it for 2 years, and they didn't release me until, they were satisfied with it was healed and I was going to be okay. But they told me that I would always have problems, some problems, like, because when you're burned, you can't take heat like you used to. Plus, I almost froze to death, so I can't take cold like I used to. They told me when I had frostbite, I will get frostbite more easier than other people. To this day, during the winters, I can wear 4 or 5 pairs of socks and my feet still freeze. I have to be really careful in the winter with getting frostbite again. And the problems with my back, I think, are a little associated with that wreck because my I have a lot of problems with my back, and it's got to where every now and then I'll be dragging my right foot like I used to. But I did, over the years, walk back and forth to work quite a bit for many years. So, and by the time I got home, every night, every morning, whatever, that foot I'd hardly be able to lift it. So I've dealt with that ever since the wreck. But I did walk, and I defeated the odds. I survived. I don't know how. I was thrown around that van. I was thrown out of it. I was run over by it. I was dragged by it. And I survived. And it's hard to think of it sometimes because it was a very hard time with survivor's guilt, and there was a lot of pain. I had a lot of pain from that burn, and I don't know if you ever watched Grey's Anatomy, where it is shown them picking the stuff off of a burn victim, the skin. That is very much true. That happens. For me, I took the skin pretty good that they grafted on, so they didn't have to pick too much of it off. But there was a guy in there that he had frostbite on his hands, and they had to keep cutting pieces of his fingers off. And he refused pain medication because what had happened was he got drunk and passed out in the snow. And he refused pain medication because he said he was never going to do anything to lose his senses again. That taught him, and he walked around like this all the time, and it was like half a finger here, and it was just awful. I saw some awful things in that burn unit, but I was with some wonderful people too. The night I got there, the only other female that was there was a nun that had started to take a bath. She turned on the hot water into the tub, and then she had a stroke and fell into it, and it burned her really badly. The night I got there, she passed away. So I was the only female there the whole time I was there. The rest of them were men, and they joked with me, and they kept me, because I was an 18-year-old girl who had been burned on her chest. That's devastating in itself. So these men, they helped me mentally. Of course, I still have difficulties thinking about it because it's on my chest, but I just wanted you to know that things like that happen, and people miraculously survive. I'm still here all these years later. I can still walk, even though I now have arthritis in my knees and I can barely walk, but I can. But just don't drink and drive. Take it easy when there is snow and ice on the ground. Don't be thinking you're, in the Indy 500 or something. It only takes a second to lose control. And it changed everybody's life that day. The ones that survived, the ones that died, the one that died, and his family. And me, I still think about him. We were only together for 3 weeks, but I still think about him all these years later. So, be safe out there. Put on your seatbelt. Don't be sitting on no cooler. And take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.